I've been working on this template to help get people started with the Canvas starter app. I'm going to actually backport it into the React starter app as well. But all of the setup that is currently in the README. So if you go in the README file, it walks you through setting up a new Canvas starter app. And it talks about the file modifications and changing file names and setting up secrets and all this other stuff. That's not terrible, but you have to read through this entire thing, which kind of stinks because you're going to spend a bunch of time setting up the application, and a lot of that could be automated, and in fact we did automate it. So the way that we've done the automation is with a Rails application template. So I wanted to walk through constructing a Rails application template and just show you kind of what's involved. But first, let me show you what it does. So here's, drop into my projects directory here. All right, so the way that you use a, let me make this a little bit bigger. A Rails application template is the same way you would create a new Rails application. You type Rails new and you give it a name. So in this case, I'm going to call it My Great Application. Then you give it a -m and you give it the path to the template. I've got it on my local machine. You can also run this directly off of GitHub, so you can give it a URL. So if I go Canvas Starter App, Canvas, come on, Canvas template, like that. Okay, so that's going to execute this code that lives in this Canvas template. So I hit go. This is going to ask me a couple of questions. So one of which is, it's going to say, what is the GitHub or Bitbucket URL that I want to push this up to? And the reason it asks that is it's going to set up the GitHub repository for you, and it'll actually do a push to that repository with an initial commit. I don't have that set up, so I'm just going to skip it. So if I hit enter, it'll skip it. It asks for the default port that you want to run this application on, which for most Ruby on Rails applications is 3000. Because we run so many apps, though, we frequently change that port to 3005 or 10 or whatever. For now, I'm just going to accept 3000 as the default. Same with the asset server. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about the way that we use Webpack with Ruby on Rails, and this port is for that hot reload server. So this is where Webpack is going to be running and serving our assets, our JavaScript mainly. All right, so I'm just going to accept 8000, just hit enter. Now this is going to run a whole bunch of different commands to install, well, to build a Ruby on Rails application and install the app, and there we go. It's run bundle install. Now it's going to do an npm install in the client directory, and when it's all said and done, I'll have an application. This is going to take a minute to run, so I'm going to let it run in the background and show you what the template actually does. All right, so Ruby on Rails has a templating system for writing generators. That's whenever you do Rails generate, model or scaffold or whatever it is you're going to do. It's using this templating system. It's built on top of another library called Thor. So let me pull that up and show you. All right, so this is Thor. This is the gem that Ruby on Rails uses to build all kinds of stuff, I guess. I don't know. Let me pull up another file that shows the actual code. I just have to find it. All right, so this is the class. Let me make sure that that's really true. So here's a bunch of the Thor methods that you can use inside of your Ruby on Rails app. I'll post these links. This is more just for information. As I was building this template, I had to go look at this source code so that I could figure out what was going on and get things to work. Anyway, onto the template. All right, so there's a couple of things I include right here at the top. One is file utils, and the other is secure random. Will show where those are used, but you can basically include any of the standard libraries that you'd like. I've hard-coded the repository because this is a template for the Canvas starter app, and so we know what the repository URL is ahead of time. And actually, this is the repository URL if you are able to access and update the Canvas Starter app. We can change that to HTTP if people want to use it without having direct access to the Canvas Starter app project. But everybody on our team has that access, so that works fine. Destination root is one of the methods provided by the framework, actually by Thor. It tells you where the application is going to be generated. So it's in here. Destination. It's in here somewhere. Yeah, right here. So I saved that off into this working directory, and I'll show you why, I guess, here in a little bit. I've added these helper methods, one of which is to get the Git Repo URL. Remember that question that says, what is the, change that to GitHub or Bitbucket URL. So you can ask the user questions. That's all built in. We store that off, and then we can use it later on when we want to set up that URL. These are some other helper methods I can go over. Here we set up the app name. So the app name is basically the app directory. So when I do Rails new migrate application or whatever, that migrate application becomes my app name, but I can call titleize on it. And what that does is it changes it from something that looks like this, my great application, into my great application, like that. Rails, well, actually Active Support has a number of these string, I can't remember what they're called. There are a bunch of string methods, basically, that allow you to do like titleize or camel case. It will change your string into an expected value. So I think there's a dasherize, which would change this into something like this with dashes. There's a classify, which changes this into my great application, and we use all of those actually in this code. All right, so I gather up the name, I make sure I have the GitHub repository, I ask the user for the Rails port and the asset port. This ask with default is a helper method that I added, but it basically uses this ask, which is built in. So we just needed a little bit of extra functionality, which was this, give it a default port, and we set the color to blue. You can set it to a number of different colors. Okay, so this is where we kind of hack this entire process. Normally, when you're using a Rails application template, you let Rails generate the application, and then you make a few changes. Like you might include some gems, and you might change a couple of files. In our case, we don't actually want any of the code that Ruby on Rails generates. So the very first thing we do is delete it all. This part, these 2 lines of code, took me the longest. And the reason why is originally I was just deleting the entire directory. This working directory, see, I've saved that off. Remember up here with destination root. So that's the full path to this new application. In this case, it would be project/migrate application. Problem is if you delete that directory, it confuses the template system. It confuses Thor, I think, and the current directory becomes undefined. So you can't wipe out that directory, but you can wipe out all of the contents of that directory, and that's what file utils rm/rf, given the working directory and then just slash with a dot, it will get rid of everything in that directory, but leave the directory. Now, when I call git clone, Git will recognize that it's an empty directory, and it will allow me to clone all of the Canvas Starter app code into that directory. So that's actually really painful to figure out. That's not how it's supposed to work. This is a little bit hackish, but that's how we need it to work, so it works great. The next couple bits, we set the remote. So we want to track the original. What's that?
You got cd dot dot.
Correct.
Wouldn't that clone working directory into the parent directory, not replace it?
No, because at this point, this run method operates inside of working directory. So you actually have to move up a directory. And that's part of the problem with wiping out that directory is you are running inside of the directory. And then if you run that rmrf, originally I was doing something that looked like this. I would go up to the parent directory, then I would do an rmrf on the working directory right here. And that just blew up. Like, you have all kinds of problems. So I don't delete the working directory. I just delete the contents right here. And then I go up a directory and I clone into the working directory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I know, it seems really strange because when you look at the code, you're like, well, that's not what I would do on the command line, but because how this thing's running, that's just the way it works.
I think I missed that slash dot there in the rmrf as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that cleans out all of the Rails code and makes an empty directory. Otherwise, if you do a git clone into a non-empty directory, it has a little temper tantrum. And then I was doing stuff like run cd ... and rm rf working directory /star, and I thought that would work, but this doesn't match hidden files. So then you have to add another command, and I was like, screw it, we'll just use the Rails file utils and make it work that way. And this works great. So with that one line, I was able to accomplish what I needed to. So yeah, so that gets us all the code. This sets up the original Canvas starter app as upstream. Or I'm sorry, that's what this one does. This one right here sets the origin to the Git repo that you specify. The Git, whether it's GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever, you can specify any URL for a Git repository, and it will set that as the new origin. So it's kind of cool. You can run a number of Git commands, and then this is where I add the Canvas starter app as the upstream, so you can continue to pull in changes. So you don't have to edit any of this stuff by hand anymore. All right. So then I just copy the database example over to database YML, and I leave it. I copy the secrets example to secrets YML. I do make one replacement inside of there, which is any of these lines that provide instructions to the user to run rake secret. I replace those lines with a secure value. So if you run rake secret, it just runs secure random.hex 64. This method, this gsub file, opens a file, finds a match, and replaces it. So it'll replace it the one time. So I'm going to load that. Secrets. Example right here. See, it has all these rake secret. Now, originally I thought it would replace them all with the same value, but it doesn't. It replaces each one with a different value because basically every time it makes a match, it replaces it with whatever you put here, and this gets executed each time, which is really handy, actually. So now, just really quick, let's go into that application. I'm going to open it up. And I'm going to throw this away, so that's fine. But you can see here's this encryption key with a value. Here's the default LTI secret with a different value, and so on and so forth. So basically all of those get replaced, and you don't have to do that by hand anymore. So that's really nice. There's a couple of things like these that we still need to work out. So there's still a little bit of polish, but eventually this should be completely written, and you won't even have to touch the secrets YML. But before, like application RB, no, there's a bug. I'll fix this too. But it should have changed it to something more like that. Like I said, we'll fix it. But it does go through the application and change all of those values. All right, so here's where we set up the .env. So env is specific to each developer. So the first guy who actually runs the template, this will probably set up everything that they need, and then the next guy who pulls this down from GitHub will probably need to still create their own .env file with their own particular values, like their own subdomain and whatnot, because with ngrok you want your own subdomain. This modifies the strings throughout the application. So this is what does the search and replace. It looks for Canvas starter app and replaces it with appname.classify, which I thought, well, I'll come back and test it. I thought that that would change the app name from my great application to my great application like that, but it does not appear to be doing that correctly. Test it really quick. Yeah.
I just tested it and it does work.
Okay. And so it does change it correctly?
Yeah. You just must be finding the wrong thing.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we'll work that out. Yeah, it seemed like that was the right thing, but somehow it's replacing it probably with this value down here. Yeah. Anyway, this says the files that we want to change end in RB, JS, YAML, ERB, so on and so forth. So we only want to change these files. Otherwise, it tries to find some other, like, the .ru file or the .lock. It'll actually find all your image files when you do a dir glob like this. And then it tries to read them in, and it'll crash because they're not strings, right? They're binary files, images and so on, favicon, that type of thing. So this says only worry about these files. And it does that by first, the dir glob working directory *** will find every file and all the files in the subdirectories, and then we just filter them by running a reject. So we say, hey, if this is a directory, we don't want to do anything to directories, and if it's not in that set of allowed file extensions, then throw it out. Then we also throw in the .env, the gem file, and the Ruby gem set, because there's strings in those that we need to change. If there are other files, we can add those as well. Then we go through each one of those and we modify the strings using this gsub file method, which apparently is still a little bit buggy, but we'll fix. Then we just can run gem install bundler, install foreman, do a bundle install, that gets all our gems installed, drop into the client directory and do an npm install. Then we can run rake commands. You can run any arbitrary rake command. So this sets up the database, seeds the database. Then this will do an initial commit to your local GitHub repository, and if you've specified that remote GitHub or Git repo, then it'll push it up. Then you can just output some notes here at the end, which the user will probably ignore, but they're there just in case. All right, any questions? None? Okay. Hopefully this ends up saving us some time. It took me longer to write than I had hoped, mainly because of these 2 lines right there. That little piece took me a while to figure out how to get it to not completely barf when I deleted everything in the directory.
So how do you run this file?
Oh, that's a good question. There's a little note in the top, but you basically run it like this right here. So you just do Rails new, give it the name of your application, do a -m, and then you give it the path to the template.
Okay.
So we'll be able to run this directly from GitHub. You can run it like this, I think. HTTP, whatever.
Okay. So that repo command, will that pick that up automatically?
Pick which up?
Never mind.
Okay.
I mean, if I just had this file and not the entire repository, would it my running Rails on it, go in and say, oh, repo has been assigned to GitHub, go out and get that automatically.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can put this template anywhere you like. In fact, you could make this the default Rails. Whenever you type Rails new, you can make this a default template on your system if you wanted. And it would run this immediately after running Rails new, but I don't recommend that because you'll still want to be able to generate Rails applications, I imagine. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Or
I'm good.
okay. I will debug this a little bit more, try to get it cleaned up the rest of the way, and then we'll have an easier path towards building new templates. All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.